So this is a picture of maybe me as a psychologist. I've been in the gaming industry for about 2 decades. I joined the industry wanting to apply knowledge and methodologies from psychology to game design. So I did a bunch of that, lots of stats and machine learning, lots of user interface research, user experience research, economic systems design, non-invasive brain computer interfaces as well. The through line through all this was I'm very fascinated by the data we can collect from players and what we can do with it. For most of my career, it was spent trying to figure out how we could make more effective game designs, more entertaining game designs. But in the last few years, I've started to see the potential of games to, again, do something more. This is one of my favorite quotes. I try and put it in every talk that I give. If it can be destroyed by the truth, it deserves to be destroyed by the truth. Sagan said this. It encapsulates my ethos as a researcher. And I'd like to see what truths games can uncover. So let's think about the dominant forms of media today, dominant forms of what we see in pop culture. We're going to ignore social media for the moment. That's a separate conversation. But if you think about, music, movies, TV, video games, you listen to music, you watch movies, you watch TV, but you play video games. Games are different, right? There's an interactive component that makes them, that separates them from the more passive experience of movies, music, and TV. Creators of music, movies, television, you experience what they want you to experience. With games, the player is an active agent. So this is the key difference. And so just to kind of make this a little bit more concrete, you have the player provide an input to the game creates a response. It's often conveyed or rendered on a display. And as a consequence, the player produces a new input to the game, and around we go. Moving up a level of abstraction, right? You have a behavior that is conveyed to a system, which generates a response, which then generates a new behavior, and around we go, right? This is the interactive nature of gameplay, right? This is what sets them apart from, again, the traditional forms of media. So let's think about other characteristics of games. I use the word affordance here. That's just a fancy word that psychologists and designers too like to use. It means the function offered by the form. So what functionality do we get that is offered by video games? We get virtual environments, right? We can create any kind of scenario we could possibly imagine, almost any kind of scenario. We get immediate and delayed feedback. You can give people feedback in the moment and look at skill progression over time. We obviously dynamically alter and generate gameplay experience, and you get this interactive loop where you have continual user input and a continual system response. We can measure any kind of behavior we could possibly imagine in ways that you can't do in the real world and in ways that you may not want to do in the real world. In a game, everything that happens, we can record, which is very, very important and very, very powerful. And games are great at providing systemic intention. That's just a fancy way of saying they're goal-directed, right? We can give players goals to accomplish, often goals that are entertaining. We can give them interesting problems to solve. Games have been designed for, decades to accomplish this very task. So if you put all those things together, what I see as a researcher, as a scientist, is not necessarily a game, but an experimental testbed. This is the potential of games that is going unrealized, right? Imagine a scenario where you wanted to run an experiment with 10,000 different variations on 1 million people, right? 100 people per condition. You can't do that in the real world. In a game, you could do this tomorrow. Maybe not actually tomorrow, but soon, right? You could do it next week. We could have 10,000 subtle variations of somebody trying to learn a skill, a concept, right? And give it to 1 million people. Measure everything that they're doing, right? Make sense of it, and hopefully learn from it. So I see games as entertainment constructs, but also as knowledge generation engines, right? As science creation engines. We have a bunch of data. We're getting much better at making sense of it. We can record everything that people do. We can make sense of it too with all of our analytical tools, right? Like the deep learning revolution, all the algorithms we have to make sense of data. We can do that in ways that were not possible even a decade ago. When I started, we called it statistics, then it became data science, then machine learning, now AI, artificial intelligence. Technically, these have different meanings, but we're all after the same goal, right? Trying to look for patterns in data. If you give one person 1 million data points, it might take them 1 million seconds. Today, we can do it in a microsecond, right? 1 millionth of a second. You can make sense of it. So if you couple our ability to gather a bunch of data in an experimental testbed with a bunch of analysis, you add in the feedback loop that games provide, where we can take whatever learnings we have, send them back to the player. What you get are new kinds of adaptive experiences. And so if you think about, traditional gameplay, right? The player is trying to service the goals of the game, right? The game is presenting a series of problems to the player. We could flip back and see it on its head and have the game try and solve the goals of the player instead of vice versa. The player is trying to figure out what the game wants it to do, and that's traditional gameplay. What I'm saying is maybe the game could try and figure out what the player wants to do. Maybe the player is frustrated. How should the game respond? Maybe the player is trying to learn a thing. How should the game respond? Maybe something else. And so I'm going to get to that kind of at the end of the slide, at the end of the talk in a couple of minutes. But I want you to think about what happens when instead of the player playing the game starts learning from the player and trying to figure out what the player wants to do. What you get are new kinds of games. Games are typically designed for everybody. Right here, the experience is tailored to the person. The person does a certain sequence of actions. They're the only person that's going to get that experience. And if we're trying to solve a particular problem, like learning a thing, the game can do that. If we do this at scale, we get generalizable knowledge. And all this leads to novel dynamics in gameplay. where again, the game is learning from the player and then responding. So I call those new kinds of games. What I meant is that these are new kinds of affordances of games, where we're adding new functionality for what games can do. And as a consequence, and this is the heart of it, you can start thinking of games as more than just entertainment. So imagine education, learning, right? Trying to understand how people learn. We can go back to that 1,000,000-person experiment, 10,000 variations of learning a thing, right? We could figure out what is the most effective way that people have learned a concept. It's an experiment you can't run with 1,000,000 students at 10,000 schools, but you could do it in a game. Think about PTSD, trying to figure out how to treat somebody who is suffering. Not everybody has access to a therapist. Well, we could take what we believe are therapeutic best practices, see how they translate to a game, start measuring the impact of producing therapy inside of a game, giving people access to a thing they don't have access to now, right? So like what we are after is trying to think of the affordance, the potential of games. What can we do with games and game-like constructs that we weren't doing previously? And what problem spaces can we use them to make progress in? Whether it's education, training, skill development, simulation, therapy, or whatnot. We are trying to do, maybe teach people a second language, improve critical thinking, treat PTSD, reduce anxiety. Those are a few domains. I think there are many, many more, and we'd love it if you join us. Thank you very much.